Hello, welcome back to my fave fanfics. Here, I post, well, my favorite fanfictions, if that wasn't obvious. I do hope you'll enjoy them as much as I do. Please like and subscribe for more content. Without further ado, let's get started.
Welcome, my dear faves, to the 12th part of What If Minato Yeeted Himself and His Son into the World of Demon Slayer. Credit goes to SapavemLasae. Chapter 41. Roots tangled with hyacinth, fingers laden in nightshade. Minato was no stranger to loss. Even before his dimension-jumping adventures, he had understood the grip of loss on oneself. He lost his parents before he could learn their names. He lost his original genin sensei and most of his team before he became a chunin. By the time he was a jonin, he'd lost countless friends to war. He too had inflicted loss. His hands were stained with the blood of many and their souls cried for retribution every time he closed his eyes. Their hands reached for his neck, threatening to choke the life he fought so hard for. But no loss had hit him quite the way the loss of Kushina had. Even his team did not measure up. The only losses that came close were those he faulted himself over. The losses he agonized over at night, wondering why he wasn't ever fast enough. Hirishin was created out of the single idea of being able to reach everyone in time. Obito still died. Rin still committed suicide. Obito's death had still been easier than the latter to handle, however, due to the circumstances. Minato had his obligations. Rin's death. Oh, that had been hard. He could still recall the lost look in Kakashi's eyes and the weeks he spent afterward trying not to sleep. Screams would flood Minato's home whenever he managed to coax Kakashi into slumber. The boy was so scared of himself that he'd often fight Minato, trying to leave. Minato had felt every failure cement even further in his soul as he calmed the boy down and bore whatever semblance of Kakashi's burden that he could. That went to say when Minato's eyes settled on the visage of a frighteningly familiar figure, he couldn't help the snarl of pain and anguish that ripped through his throat. It was less of the Kyuubi, likely because, for all of their shared grief, Kurama did not feel this. "Hey, Minato-sensei," she spoke. Her lips were curved into the same gentle smile she had right before he sent her to her death. She hadn't aged a day, her hair trimmed just below her ears while clan markings dotted her cheeks. She was still dressed in her kunoichi attire too. And, tellingly, there was no blood along her torso. Minato checked more than once as he swallowed thickly. "Why you? You can't. I won't let the Sharingan fool me," Minato murmured. He couldn't stop the softening of his voice even if the grief held the harsh edge close. He was seconds away from pulsing his chakra and making Kurama drag him free. Damn the consequences, Obito didn't deserve to use the dead against him. "Ah, sensei, I would have thought you'd know better. Though I guess you were always cautious." Rin spoke as she shifted on her feet. Her hands cupped behind her back and she hopped a step closer. Minato went rigid, stepping back without intending to. Rin gazed at him sadly. "You were always pulling away from us. The others might not have noticed, but I did. You held us close, but still so far away. Not that I blamed you. You knew loss better than all of us. A bunch of starry-eyed kids who barely had any idea how the world worked." Or well, she looks away again, face cresting into something that made Minato's chest ache further. He knew that look better than most. Self-loathing. starry-eyed me, unaware of the world and how much I'd have to give to honor my title of kunoichi. I think I figure it out though, in the end, she murmurs almost wistfully, one hand coming up to press at her chest. Exactly where the Chidori had pushed through. Minato let out a sound of pain, reaching for his chakra. He couldn't handle seeing this. Not when he knew that Rin was gone and Obito was making a mockery of her memory. A flicker, and faster than Minato could track, his student stood in front of him. "Sensei. You don't believe it's me, but I know something Obito never could," Rin says. Her gaze softens even further. Minato doesn't know why her words halt him. He doesn't know why. Except he does. He knows exactly why he chooses to listen. Because deep down he feels hope. Rin raises her hand, reaching out for Minato even as she speaks. "You told me, the hardest part about being a shinobi is losing what it means to be human." Minato stalls. Blue widens in shock as he feels a fine tremor run through him. Those words. The very words he said to this girl on their very first C rank out of the village. He could still recall the cool air against their sides. He had sat with his back against hers as Rin hugged her knees. She had taken her first life on that mission and was left wondering about her place in the world. She was supposed to be a medic nin, someone like Tsunade of the Sannin. But she had taken a life. It had been in defense of their client, but Minato could still recall the way she had cried as she wondered if she was doing the right thing. At the time, Minato had very little to offer in comfort. He remembered the first thing he told her. Shinobi were fickle. The worst part about their profession wasn't something they could change, and it tore at them. They would inevitably lose the meaning of humanity. Minato swallows thickly. He's reaching out even as he feels his chakra waver. Rin smiles up at him and tilts her head to the side. And because of that, the difference between a shinobi and a killer is the way one redefines their humanity. Minato murmurs in return, his hands coming to rest on Rin's shoulders. He shudders again as he feels her under him. Chakra presses at him, a rush of it that he marks as something no one else could fake. Even if somehow someone figured out what he told Rin that night, this wouldn't lie. How? He finds himself asking before he can stop himself. Rin laughs, and it's quite the pretty thing that both sends a jolt of grief and happiness through Minato. He could recall days spent with his genin, watching them laugh and argue. He thought the time he would hear those things was long gone. Chakra impressions are useful. And even though I don't quite understand it fully, she begins, her gaze shifting as she reaches up to grab Minato's wrist tightly. I wager it has a lot to do with me inheriting the stubbornness of Team 7, she cheekily finishes. Minato can't help but chuckle at that. The sound catches in his throat, becoming a sob partway through. It tears at his walls and the grief that rushes through him. He winces when a hand flicks his forehead. His nose scrunches and he pulls back as he glares down at his student. The sunshine smile she casts him is entirely Kushina. Stop that. I'm dead, yeah, but it was my choice. You aren't responsible. And I've made peace with it. If it weren't for a stubborn idiot, I'd probably be gone by now. Rin says truthfully, shaking her head. She shifts and smiles gently at Minato again. Minato wants to argue with her. Her words cut at him like any knife despite their softness. Failure tugs at him, ruthless and unending. She seems to understand, but she doesn't press further. She turns instead, her eyes gazing into the vastness around them. Obito. He's made a lot of mistakes, she begins. Minato goes rigid. He jerks back, feeling like he was just slapped. Because he knows that tone of voice. It's the same tone the girl used every time Obito and Kakashi fought and had to work it out. It's the same tone she adopted when teaching Genin at the academy. I won't, Minato begins, venom dripping on his tongue. Rin raises a hand. He goes silent, even though Minato wants nothing more than to scream that he can't forgive Obito. I'm not asking that, she murmurs. Once more her eyes are sad as she shifts her brown eyes back to him. I'm not asking you to forgive him. Not when I don't forgive him either. Minato's throat feels tight. She chuckles. It's bitter sounding. I am only asking that you let him talk. For your sake. Because sensei, he is going to try to make things right. Whether or not you accept it is on you. Minato can't quite breathe as he listens to the girl. Listen to him? I can't even look at him. You don't even know all he's done. Minato begins again, but his voice is wavering back to grief rather than anger. Rin gives him a sad smile. I do. I've seen it all. From the moment I died, to when Naruto was born, to Kushina's death. I've seen all he's done and the pain he caused, she says, and then her voice dips into a broken whisper. All for me. She turns again, as though Minato's grief is too much for her to bear. As though the idea that her death had hurt Obito that much pains her too greatly. Her eyes waver as she stares into the abyss. He destroyed my home. The very place I sacrificed myself to protect. And part of me will never forgive that. Part of me will hold that pain and grief until I fade away. Maybe even beyond this world, I'll still hate him for that. But part of me also can forgive him. The part that was his friend. The part that cried when he died. Rin sighs heavily again. You love Kushina. But you love this world too. You love the people in it. So, for their sake, let Obito help you. And when he's done, do what you feel is best. It is not my place to say anything more. Tanjiro finds his current company to be strange. It's not in a wholly bad way. Just in I'm not used to this sort of way. He sits next to Minato as the man fitfully rests. Whatever ability was used on him, it's taking its toll. Tanjiro could feel the man's chakra writhing under his skin. He's unsettled and likely distraught. How did you meet Minato? A voice suddenly rises. Akuto sits next to the fire, prodding at the food residing under hot coals. His blue eyes echo the sparks that rise around them. Across from the boy, Obito lays on his side with his back to them. The gesture could be seen as foolish to others, but not to Tanjiro. He could tell that the man was more than sure of his abilities, and for good reason. Obito had nothing to fear from either of them. Minato, perhaps, but not a former charcoal burner or an ex-guardsman. Tanjiro hums as he shifts, his breathing still matching the sedate pace of total concentration. The air around him is warm, and not just from the fire. He sensed the tailed beast in my son. After explaining everything to us, he and several others offered my family a place among the demon slayers, Tanjiro informed him. Akuto paused and his brow furrowed momentarily before he shifted to look at Tanjiro fully. His stick lay forgotten in the embers. Tailed beast? Like bee? He wonders, continuing his thoughts with, which one? Quote. Tanjiro debates for a moment whether he should offer up much more. Akuto wasn't someone he feared retribution from. At least not the kind that he could protect his family from. Obito, on the other hand, was still quite the unknown. Obito, as though sensing his cause for hesitance, shifted to peer over his shoulder at the man. It would have to be either the Ichibi or the Nanabi considering the ages of the others. Considering the Nanabi is female, it'd have to be the Ichibi's Jinchuriki. Huh, I figured that the Yondaime Case Cage's kid was a mindless killer. Obito's quick deduction caused a bit of protectiveness to stir in Tanjiro's chest. He held it at bay, sensing the surprising lack of malice or aggression in the man when he mentioned the Jinchuriki. In fact, he almost felt regretful. Perhaps Raza should have learned how to properly parent a child. If you hurt a beast, isn't it only right for that beast to bite back? And the same for love. If you offer love, validation, and support, then you'll receive the same in return, Tanjiro voiced. He couldn't help the slight edge to his words when he recalled Gaara's birth father. It had been several years since Gaara first confided in Tanjiro about his previous family. Even so, Tanjiro couldn't quell the frustration and anger that stemmed when he thought about it. He couldn't imagine treating any of his children with any less love than the next. He couldn't imagine ordering their deaths. Any man who did the same did not deserve the title of parent. They did not deserve to even utter the name of the child they brought into the world. Obito gazes at him just a few moments longer. He blinks slowly, his lone black eye scanning Tanjiro's calm features. Then, the man sighs and shifts, rising and pivoting around so he faces the campfire. He propped one hand under his chin as he stared at Tanjiro. He doesn't ask anything, but his attention now rests on the conversation. Akuto, who stopped to observe the exchange, clears his throat. Why did you stay with the Demon Slayers? Quote. Tanjiro blinks and then chuckles. He hums and looks down at his hands. He can see the calluses there, formed after many years of hard work. They remind him of his past. Of all he's worked for. It was done for his family, in the end. Because I am but one man, and I only wish for the best for my family. Perhaps we could have stayed away. Remained in our home on a lonely mountain with only each other. Or perhaps we could have offered Gaara a different home with Minato. But that wasn't the best for us. Not when I knew of the threat demons posed and the power Gaara held in his hands. He needed someone who understood him. And well. Tanjiro looks down at Minato. He remembers a night spent sitting with his wife. Kei had mentioned how hurt Minato was. She mentioned how Minato needed a family. He needed something worth getting better for. Because even if Minato had Naruto, even if he had the other Slayers and kids, he was still so filled with grief. It ran in him the same blood ran through anyone else. Tanjiro couldn't bear to watch the light that burned brightly in Minato's eyes fade into nothing more than a spark of agony and misery. I was needed. As his words slip away into the wintry night, Minato stirs. His eyes snap open and the blue haze reaches Tanjiro's before anyone else. Relief floods Minato's gaze. Tanjiro hums and inclines his head. He can't stop the smile that shifts over his features. Minato's gaze doesn't linger on him for long. Though, he supposes that's only logical. It shifts from Tanjiro to Akuto. A pause, and then it shifts again. Obito. Obito watches Minato carefully. He looks carefree and relaxed, but they can all see how tense he is under the facade. He's ready to spring at a moment's notice. Minato lets out a shudder, teeth clacking together. His form goes rigid and Tanjiro reaches out to grab his shoulder. Before he can grab the man, a hand rises and stops him. Minato's hand. "I want you to know one thing," Minato murmurs. Tanjiro can't see his face, but he can hear the undercurrent of fury. He can see the set of Minato's jaw and sense the chakra that churns in a deadly dance under the surface. Obito inclines his head once. When this is over, Minato's chakra pulsed and filled the air. Heavy and laden with killer intent, it brushed over all three but firmly settled across Obito's shoulders. "I will be taking your life." Chapter 42. Wrecked beyond reason, ghosts of the past. "I'm not sure you realize what trouble you are in." Minato sighed as he listened to his longtime friend. "No, I know," he said with a grimace. He knew returning wouldn't be easy after what he'd done. It wasn't every day that he lost it after all. The reminder serves to multiply the ache and exhaustion spreading through him. Not even the end of the war left Minato this exhausted. No, the closest to this had to be after Naruto was born. He's struggling to keep his eyes open. Tanjiro laughed at his expense as he shook his head. His gaze flitted from Minato to their companions. Obito and Akuto sat across from them, prodding at the destroyed hearth as the flames curled around them. Akuto was the only one offering any glances back. Ever since Minato finished his threat, Obito had remained silent. Neither of them wanted to interact with the other. Tanjiro supposed it was better than another battle to the death. "Perhaps it's best just to get it over with," he offers. He does want to return home sooner rather than later. He must have worried his children with his actions and he doesn't want to leave them to wonder if he was safe. And he could tell that if they didn't leave now, the likelihood of Minato being able to jump back was slim. Kei would also likely have words for him when he returned. Once she finished checking him over and ensuring he wasn't injured anyway. Minato hummed softly, his eyes shading over before he finally let out a heavy breath and rose to his feet. He was quiet as he pondered the inevitable. Then, he reached out to get Tanjiro up. His gaze flicked back to the other two. "Akuto, are you joining us or not?" he demands. His voice is tired, losing its edge. His eyes are almost dull as the world starts to hum and sway. Akuto glances from the man to his companion. Tellingly, Obito waves his hand. Something sweeps through Minato when he realizes that Obito has no intention of joining them. Not that he would have offered, but it does make him more than a little satisfied to know. "I'll join you. I don't have a reason not to," Akuto responds. He rises and walks over to take Minato's outstretched hand. Before Minato jumps, however, he takes one last look at his former enemy. The blue hues darken further and a sweep of killer intent fills the space between them. "Don't forget. You'll never be free of me now." The arrival at the estate went about as Minato expected. He was far too tired, both mentally and physically, to do more than accept the blondes that launched at him. He would have fallen over had Tanjiro not steadied him. His children clung to him. Their words fell on deaf ears as the world swam around Minato. He struggled to reassure them, to focus. Tanjiro spoke, his chakra blanketing the area. Minato found himself leaning in as Tanjiro said something that managed to quell the rush of white noise. Minato still couldn't focus, but it was enough to at least put him at ease. He gripped Hiroko's shoulder and wound a hand around the back of Naruto's neck, tugging the two even closer to him. They both stalled, but soon arms wrapped around him. He still couldn't hear them past his ringing ears. He couldn't so much as move. His body felt like lead. What was going on? And why? Why was he so tired? At some point, the sky overhead was no longer visible. At some point, Minato ended up in his room staring at the ceiling with twin heads tucked at either arm. He could feel the pressing weight of a blanket on him, covering 3 bodies and keeping them warm. He blinked, wondering when it had happened. His body still felt heavy, but not nearly as bad as before. He felt warm though, warmer than normal. He shifted under the covers. Blue eyes shifted over the heads. A pang of grief filled him when he caught the swollen features of his son. A quick check of his daughter showed she wasn't much better. He shuddered and took a deep breath. The sounds rushed back in as he felt the warmth seep into his bones. It causes a shiver down his spine and he bites back a soft noise of pain as his body is racked with tremors. "How are you feeling?" Quote. Minato would have flinched and likely grabbed a weapon if he wasn't so tired. Instead, his eyes flicked to the unknown as a mild panic sets in. Tanjiro offers him a soft smile. He reaches out, offering a cup of water to Minato. "You need to drink something. You have a fever," he notes. The notion is enough to make Minato's head spin. His brow furrows as he tries to organize his thoughts. He doesn't succeed. He maneuvers, shifting Hiroko down his side while Naruto remains tucked into the crook of his shoulder. He takes the cup and drinks. Perhaps the most shocking thing is the fact that he can't taste it. It just slides down his throat in a cool haze. "Kurama wouldn't let me get sick," he murmurs, his throat aching as he speaks. His eyes burn too and Minato wonders how red they are. He must look like such a mess. Tanjiro lets out a low sigh. He reaches out, shoving Minato back. The man falls against the covers without a fight. He makes a noise of confusion before another blanket finds itself strewn over him. Minato almost feels like a little kid again. Or maybe, like he did when he was a genin, Jiraiya watching over him when he trained. Tanjiro casts him another soft smile. Maybe, he can't help this time. "You aren't sick with something that can be cured with medicine, Minato," the man explains gently. Minato's face scrunched, but it's getting difficult to think and his eyes shutter closed. He tries to hold on even as the comforting warmth tugs at him. Wounds of the heart take much more to heal. And then he's gone, sinking back into slumber. There are several days between when Minato returns and when he finally wakes for good. Possibly a week, though every time he comes to no one will tell him how long he's been out of it. Still, each time he wakes Tanjiro is near him. The first 2 times Hiroko and Naruto haven't left his side, but the third finds just the 2 of them. Minato coughs and shudders, his body aching more than he ever thought possible. He hasn't been sick in so long thanks to Kurama, and he's just not used to feeling this way. Tanjiro offers him tea and company. He talks calmly, taking care of the man without complaint. Minato wonders what he did to earn such a friendship. It reminds him of Kushina and Tsunade, though the former less than the latter. Tsunade fussed over him heavily whenever he was injured. Kushina, well, there were fond and sad memories of her caring for Minato the few times it happened. The last few times he comes to her easier. He can feel his body coming back to itself, even as he struggles to do more than drink and eat what he's offered. The hardest part isn't when he's awake though. No, the hardest part comes from his dreams. Dreams of Kushina, of Konoha and those he left behind. Dreams that make him wish he could stay there instead of waking to reality. He wakes up with tears in his eyes and more than once he just wants to scream. Regret and pain wash out from him and then, they leave him with nothing else. His throat feels raw many of the nights. Tanjiro just offers him tea or water wordlessly. His endlessly kind eyes gaze at Minato gently. As though he might break. As though he is broken. Because Minato knows what it feels like to try and piece yourself back together. He knows it well. This is just another trial. Every dream carves a hole in his chest while also healing old wounds. The faces of those he loved and cared for and still loves finally slipping through his fingers as he lets them go. He will never forget them. But he can let the pain of losing them slip by. It gets easier, somehow, as the nights go by. And maybe it also helps that as the dreams of his past dwindle, the dreams of his present and future spur to life. The last night he dreams of Kushina. And while it tears through him, it also offers him a chance to say goodbye. For good. Her hair swaying around her as she grins brightly at him. The Hokage hat cresting her brow, because for all that Minato was the Yondaime, he never would have succeeded without her. It has been both of their dream. Kushina fought hard to give him all the advice and support she could while ensuring they had a village to dream for. He lets those soft and warm thoughts swirl and meld around him. He takes them, and releases his anger and sadness into them. It's the only way he'll be able to move on. When Minato wakes again he finds tears coating his face. He takes a shuddering breath, raising a hand to cover his eyes. He breathes in for the first time in a week, it's a solid breath. Total concentration almost feels welcome after so long of letting it go. All he can remember is her face, her words, and the way she lived. And perhaps that is enough. It has to be. The anger and hatred that tinged his thoughts slipped away as Minato allowed himself that last kiss. He allows himself the love he felt and cements it deep in his heart where it will never leave. Your hair's beautiful, so I noticed it right away. I didn't want to lose you. Minato, you're going to be a father. Quote. Naruto. Our little boy Naruto. Minato. His chest aches as the memories pass by. He grips them that much tighter, his fist clenched tightly at the thought. Promise me that you'll live a full and wonderful life when I'm gone. Promise me that you and Naruto will be happy. He lets the image of his past linger. Kushina's hair whirled around her like a torrent while blood spilled over her lips. Her eyes were soft as she shifted her gaze from Minato to their son. I promise. Minato whispered. He let out a laugh, the sound carrying his grief until it vanished away, sinking into silence. Tanjiro was there when he stepped out of the room. He sat while holding a familiar earring in his grasp. The parallels to when Minato joined the Demon Slayers are not lost on him. He wonders if Shinjiro is waiting too. Feeling better? He asks. Minato doesn't answer. He knows that he doesn't need to. His grief has left him for the moment. It's no longer choking and pressing at him like a vice. And Tanjiro can feel that. Tanjiro rises to his feet. He's calm as he reaches out, placing the earring in his hand in Minato's grasp. Minato looks down at the piece quizzically. When he finally registers what he's holding, he feels his heart seize. It's not the same Hanafuda pattern as the one Tanjiro's family wears. Rather, it's another. A glimmering sea with a swirling pool in the center. Minato's eyes dart up, shock washing through him as Tanjiro offers him a soft smile. I have often wondered the purpose of things. The reasons that we follow the paths we do, and the way those choices affect us. But, regardless of the what or why, we are here. My family is quite old, and we've had many years to learn many things. We've fought and we've lived. He peers at Minato again with his red eyes. His chakra pulses and flickers as a warm haze settles around Minato. Uzumaki is not a name I go by. But it is not a name unknown to me. Minato's throat tightens at the thought. Does Tanjiro mean? You mentioned that the Hinokami Kagura was similar to something in your world, and it got me thinking, Tanjiro says and turns his head. He reaches into his robes and tugs an old and worn journal. He offers it to Minato just as he did the earring. What if you weren't the only one who found their way here? Quote. Minato takes the journal gingerly. He holds the earring in his hand still as he flips the book open. Immediately the scrawled handwriting stands out to him. Seals. Lots of them. Some are so small that he doubts they could be made without chakra, while others span the whole page. Winding and twisting lines that speak to him like another language. One he knows all too well. This. Minato whispers in shock. Tanjiro turns, beginning to walk down the hall and toward the main room. His voice carries over his shoulder even as he doesn't look back. My mother kept that journal. It was written by my grandmother. He takes one moment to settle himself, and then he keeps going. I feel like it's better off in your hands, Minato. And with that he vanishes down the hall, leaving Minato to stare at the pages in dumbstruck awe. His fingers brush the symbols in reverence. Then, the full picture hits him. He almost falls over, barely steadying himself on the wall as he realizes what Tanjiro just told him. Chakra that felt far too similar to Kushina. A strong tie to emotions and life. The uncanny call to chakra. Tanjiro's family was. Minato felt a few tears slip loose, but these weren't from grief. Rather, they were from joy. He shook his head, slapping the book shut and letting it fall to his side as he chuckled. Why was he even surprised? But now, that did open other questions. Because if one Uzumaki had somehow managed to reach this world, then what were the chances that more hadn't? And if it was truly the Uzumaki that made it here, then did that mean they were those leftover from the destruction of Uzushio, or something else? He hummed and slipped the book into one of his seals. That was something to ponder later. Perhaps when he got around to thanking Tanjiro. Because the man had somehow managed to give Minato back even the smallest portion of what he had lost all over again. And what were the chances that the man hadn't done it on purpose? Naruto and Hiroko were the first at his side again when he made it to the main room. They both pushed him to sit down immediately and fussed over him. Hiroko grabbed him food while Naruto worried about him. Before either of the two could get very riled up, Minato tugged them both down and close. He sucked in a long breath as he held them against him again. Then, he let them go and settled into the norm. The two relaxed as he ate and acted like normal. They both seemed worried, but it was quelled the longer they stayed with Minato. Tanjiro remained close by. He shared a few looks with Minato throughout the meal, but nothing more was said. Shinjiro and Kyojiro only arrived near the end of the meal and both of them beelined it to the namikaze. More fussing ensued, but Minato allowed it. He felt light as he dwelled in the feeling of home and family. It was more than he could ever ask for. Drabble. He was quite pretty. She recalls his words as she trails in the darkness. Her eyes gleam in the shadows. She's doing her best to remain hidden. Blue hair, such a rare shade. And eyes like cold steel. Red flickers over blue. Long let down hair winds around the figure standing next to another. The two are laughing together. They both are more than beautiful. Ah, I bet they were related. She recalls his smile when he spoke. A smile filled with nothing but faked sympathy and happiness. A smile that wore fangs and none of the warmth any other should. She knew that smile. She remembered it back when she was dying in the snow. She had seen it countless times on his face since. She was curious though. Few people were remembered by the Kazuki when they killed so many. Fewer still were recalled so readily. For Doma, the recalling of a man was almost unheard of. But this man had caught his eye. So in turn, the man caught hers. And she was glad he did. He was perfect. And he surrounded himself with others of that nature. Beauty in spades on features that could have come from storybook paintings. He was also not as unknown as she initially believed. His features were something she knew, but not as his identity of a Hashira, but rather almost identical to a man she had witnessed in her district a dozen times. He always came to visit one of the most pitiful things there. A woman who tried to cause problems and got her entire house killed. She did not know what become of the woman, but she knew Doma had killed the man. Who knew he was a Hashira on top of things. And now she would get to kill and devour this one. A Hashira with such beauty and elegance. She wanted him. The other, while not a Hashira, would also be of use. He was pretty enough to be eaten by her at least. And she could tell, if only from the small bits and pieces she gathered, that this one would be well worth the endeavor. If not only for her master's order on the heads of Namikaze Minato's friends but also for her own benefit. Utakata, perhaps we best turn in. It's getting late. The man spoke, reaching out to offer a hand to his companion. Utakata smiled a little brighter. Are you afraid of taking me back late, Hattori? He asks teasingly. Hattori laughs again as his spare hand reaches to brush some of Utakata's hair back. Perhaps. Lady Tamayo can be fearsome. I do not wish to anger her. He murmurs, but his eyes linger on Utakata a little longer. There's an endearing shift in them, one that she barely catches as he peers at his companion. This is hardly the first time she's watched these two go out like this. This is not the first time she has watched and wished desperately to hear either cry out as she devoured the other. But her focus shifts from the sight to something else. Something in her stirs. Tamayo. Tamayo. The traitor. The one who her master wanted back. Oh, but wasn't that just perfect? She grinned, sharp fangs glinting as her eyes hungrily drank in the sight. Her sister would be pleased to hear this. And perhaps, he would even lend her strength before she took out another Hashira. She made to store away but paused to glance back. Something curled in her chest when she watched Hattori dip his head down. Blue curtained the two from view but did little to quell what she already knew. A rush of satisfaction filled her at the thought of seeing those caring mismatched eyes filled with despair. He would look even better like that. Right before she killed him. Hitori, Utakata, if you are done flirting, let's get going. Quote. The newcomer laughs as the two separate, though only one shows a bright red countenance. It sends a shiver down her spine. The girl has glimmering violet eyes and a pretty face. So much better than all those other weak slayers. She wants to devour her too. Her lips twisted into a cruel smirk as she vanished away. She would have her meal, no. Her feast. Minato has spent several days in mourning before. He doesn't recall a time when days of mourning were followed so closely by sadness. This had to be a first. He watched all the kids bow their heads low in front of the master. The former Hashira stood at either side of Kagaya, observing their students. Their expressions ranged from pride to happiness. Minato was stuck between those and sadness himself. He was glad the kids had gotten this far, but that did not quell his worry over them. Even so, he smiled as Kagaya asked them to raise their heads. Today we welcome our new Hashira into the fold. You have all done well to get here. Kagaya offers a soft smile. He's watching not only his subordinates, but his friends rise in the ranks. Maybe the master had always had a special bond with his slayers, as Minato had once observed, but Kagaya's bond was even more special. It showed as the young man made his way to each Hashira, starting with Kyojuro. Despite being older than him by a few years, Kyojuro was already taller than the other. Minato attributed it to the teenager's genes. Rengoku Kyojuro, our new solid and unwavering flame Hashira. May you continue to set your heart ablaze. Kyojuro's hair fluffed as it tended to whenever he was flustered, his face tinting just a tad bit red. He grinned brightly and nodded at the master regardless. Shinjiro chuckled deeply next to Minato. His eyes were filled with pride as he nodded at his son and earned himself a bright smile. Minato could still recall when he first met the two. It felt like ages ago. And now Kyojuro was a Hashira. Urokodaki Makomo, our new water Hashira and a wash of cool water amidst a storm. May your strength be that of a typhoon. Makomo's soft expression wavered for a moment. Minato was certain it was the closest the girl had ever come to tears. Perhaps it was because this was the first time she was officially being named as Urokodaki's daughter, or perhaps it was just everything else. Either way, her smile turned soft and genuine. Urokodaki made a soft noise. If Minato didn't know better, he'd say the man was crying behind his mask. Then again, Minato could relate to the emotion as Kagaya moved to the next. Namikaze Hiroko. Our new Thunder Hashira, a flicker of light that bends but does not break. May the light of your steps guide you forward. Hiroko's eyes wavered. She still looked unsure of herself, standing as she was between all the others. But she accepted the prompt with grace while holding her head high. Minato gave her a fatherly smile and the girl relaxed just a tad. From behind her, Naruto made an aborted cheer, barely kept from crying out by Kanae calmly placing a hand over his mouth. It was a practiced gesture and Minato couldn't help laughing. Hiroko's face colored red but her smile softened too. He was glad the two had made up from final selection, even if it had taken him being out of commission to push the two to do it. Tengen grinned when Ubuyashiki made his way to him. The two shared gazes and then Kagaya let out a soft laugh. They had grown quite close with all of his siblings constantly going between the master's estate and Uzui's home. That and the continual visits Yugito and Tengen's wives made to have tea with Kagaya's fiancé. Minato had heard enough about what the five got up to make him laugh for a lifetime. Uzui Tengen, the flashiest among us and our new sound Hashira. May you continue to bring the festive air and remind us of the joys of life. And finally, Kagaya came to a stop on the last set of heads. Naruto, Kaigaku, Kanae, and Tsunemi. And we also welcome their students. You will all take on the title of Suguko, and per our new traditions, be able to go on missions with any of the Hashira available. I know you will do great things. Naruto is fidgeting in place, a bright smile crossing his lips. Kanae is no longer covering his mouth, seeing as he's reining in his excitement to more appropriate levels. Kanae is grinning as she nudges Tsunemi, earning her a sharp look. The boy glances back at Kagaya and scoffs, but he still inclines his head. Kaigaku looks just as excited, though he hides it better than the others. Minato hums, and at that Kagaya bows his head and dismisses them. I must get my rest. I had the Kikuchi prepare food for you at Shinjiro's estate, so please enjoy. He offers. His soft voice trails away as they all wish him well. Minato watches the young man go. He can still recall when he was just a little kid at his father's side. It was hard for Minato to think about him running the Demon Slayer Corps, even if he wasn't doing it alone. Even harder when Minato recalled that Kagaya was as old as Masekika and Yugito. Noise picked up along with chatter as the new Hashira mingled together and with the others in attendance. Even Kaigaku was dragged into the mix as the boys all grouped around him. Sabito, Giyu, and Masekika had stood to the side while they waited for the meeting to draw to a close, seeing as they were already Suguko. Along with them was another surly figure, though this one no one dared to approach while the others gathered. Minato wasn't swayed, however, and made his way over. Akuto watched the assembled group idly. He had opted to follow Minato around for the most part once Minato was awake and moving. He hardly said anything and just observed things. He and Tanjiro had sat in with the master at some point while Minato was asleep apparently. The conversation had done something for the boy, at least from what Minato had gathered just from observing him. Not going to join in with the others. Minato tests. Akuto pauses, shifting his sharp blue eyes over to Minato. He ponders for a moment, his sharp features focused on the others. Why the change to the Suguko? I thought each Hashira took on only one. He finally asks. Minato blinks. He didn't expect the question, but it is something so he rolls with it. He turns when he stops next to the boy, sweeping across the newest additions. Naruto is trying to get Kaigaku to talk and open up to mild effect. Hiroko is laughing along and trying to get him to calm down. Makomo is talking with Kanae and Hitori. Likely about trading out the girl for training. Shinjiro and Sakanji are watching from the sidelines. Likely they are enjoying the common sight of chaos, ready to intervene just in case. Along with that, Himehime is close by. Oddly enough, the Hashira hasn't stopped looking at Kaigaku. Kaigaku, on the other hand, avoids the man like the plague. Sabito and Giyu are talking with Tsunemi, or at least trying to. Sabito and Tsunemi look seconds from each other's throats while Giyu is watching calmly. Mostly it's because the kids are all discovering their styles still. And even then, we've found that learning from multiple disciplines ultimately helps Slayers more. It's the reason we pair up Slayers after they pass final selection. Minato finally says. Akuto hums and nods. We started doing something similar with younger guards. Toussaint said that it strengthened every aspect of a soldier's drive, He said we were meant to protect, and by having someone at our side we not only remembered that we had to watch their back, but they would watch ours. Minato wonders what Akuto's childhood was like. Just that statement alone draws parallels to the way Minato was raised. He finds it an unfairly common background among the kids present. He hums and catches the eyes of Tengen and Kyojuro. At his short nod, the two begin to make their way over through the gaggle of slayers. Sabito and Sanemi have finally come to blows, so they have to maneuver around the fight. Have you thought about joining them? I know Kagaya offered you a place even without taking the final selection. Minato asks. He knows it's not generally the way things are done, but after the past few years, the demon slayers have grown to accept skill over tradition. Though, that's not to say everyone is okay with such changes. Akuto pauses and glances at Minato again. His gaze is sharp and piercing. Then, he sighs. I suppose I might as well. If Zetsu is truly joining the side of the demons, then hunting him will only get easier if I have the right backing. Minato grimaces at the reminder. Anger stirs in him, but he's careful to let it go. He doesn't need a repeat of before. After his talk with Obito, he has more than enough anger to last him a lifetime. Even so, with more details of Fugaku's betrayal and Obito's plan coming to light, Minato struggles not to give into those emotions. Zetsu was a sore topic. Almost as bad as Obito himself. Still, Rin had been the one to tell him everything she could. Minato would still have to talk with Obito about the finer details, but he garnered just enough from that conversation to enable him to start planning. Kurama too helped. His insight into what Zetsu wanted was more than helpful. Not that either of them was going to let it happen. His eyes shift back to the kids as the two new Hashira arrive. Kyojuro grins at Akuto brightly. Akuto, you should join us for a spar. Tengen and I wanted to get a few reps in tonight before the festivities. He offers. Tengen grins too, matching the wavelength of his friend. It was mildly terrifying how well the two got along when it came down to things. Minato just hoped that the similarities would stop there. He couldn't handle Kyojuro wanting more than one wife. Not that he'd have any issues. None of the kids would. Minato barely succeeded holding in his murderous intent on that train of thought. Focusing back on the matter at hand, Miento's eyes flick back to the surly teen leaning on the wall. He knows an olive branch when he sees one. He also knows it's not the first one the two have extended. So far their efforts haven't been accepted, but Minato feels like that may change as Akuto eyes them closely. Akuto too, seems to know exactly what they are doing. He sighs and nods. Very well. I've been meaning to ask if you could show me a few pointers. Your style is similar to the guardsman forms. Kyojiro's smile sharpens as he nods firmly. Minato chuckles and leaves the three to it as he wanders back to the assortment of teens and adults. Sanemi and Sabito have both been dropped by Makomo and Kanae in equal measure. They are scolding the two while Giyu has left them to their fate so he can talk to Hiroko and Hattori. Hey Minato, done talking to the brooding dragon? Hattori teases. Minato raises a brow at the nickname, but he can't refute it. For now. Kyo and Tengen seem to have their sights set on dragging him through the mud tonight. I figured I'd leave him to their mercy. He offers instead. Hattori chuckles at that. Hiroko glances over at them, her eyes wavering for a moment before she comes to tuck into Minato's side. He welcomes her with an open arm, wrapping her close to his shoulder. She peers up at him and relaxes when he gives her a wink. Minato barely braces when he feels a flicker of familiar chakra. Hiroko too has to brace, though she does so against him as a blur of blonde slams into them both. Naruto grins up at them as he chatters on. "To-san, Hiroko ne, are we getting ramen?" He demands. Minato lets out a loud laugh, ruffling his son's hair. Despite the boy turning 12, he was still a bundle of absolute energy. Sure. I sent a clone out, so it should have brought everything to the estate. As Kagaya said, everything is ready at the house. Naruto bounces in excitement and Minato figures that's as good of a sign as any to gather everyone. He's not too surprised that Tengen and Kyojuro have already dragged Akuto off, likely on a run back to the mansion to get some exercise in before their match. He shakes his head but teleports the rest back to the mansion. Festivities are already in full swing when they arrive. Ruka and Kei spared no expense. With the help of Uzui's wives, all the kids, and the Jinchuriki, the celebration was bound to be as chaotic as it was grand. Minato could see the many swarms of children running in the courtyard. Uzui's siblings mixed in with Tsunemis and Gaara's. Heads of dark and light hair as the groups of kids of similar ages bunched together. To Minato's slight surprise, Tanjiro was sat with Nezuko and their two newest additions. Zenitsu was letting Nezuko braid his hair while Inosuke braided Nezuko's. He was doing a nice job too. Though, to Minato's surprise, he recognized the braid. "Welcome back." A calm voice echoed over the chaos. Minato turned to them as the others dispersed. Yagura stood and met his gaze with an incline of his head, before turning to overlook the rest of the room. He had claimed another area of the estate for himself and his family, though he and Kotoha insisted on paying for their stay via work. From what Minato gathered from Shinjiro, Yagura was handy at a lot of things around the place and he was a good teacher for the kids learning chakra. He was also more adept at teaching the other Jinchuriki since unlike Minato he had full control of his Biju's chakra. Minato was all too glad for the extra help now that more and more people were showing prowess in the art. He had his hands full with Naruto and struggled to make time for anyone else even with his clones on hand. There were also subjects he could no longer teach, such as healing, that the others were excelling at. Already 3 of Tengen's younger siblings had surpassed Minato's skills and were climbing to the same heights as Shinobu and Kanae. The sisters had even started classes to teach any Kikuchi or slayers who wanted to learn and had the aptitude for it. They would surpass Makomo soon too, what with their innate knowledge of medical techniques paired with both of their unique talents. "I take it things have been hectic?" Minato asks. He knows the answer even before Yagura chuckles. Their eyes sweep past the younger kids to the gathered adults. Everyone is smiling or laughing and it eases any worries in Minato's chest. He can only imagine how crazy New Year's will be with everyone present. Perhaps it was time to take up Kagaya's offer to extend the estate. However, Minato also knew that the wives managed the household well. They were a force to be reckoned with. As he is debating that line of thought, Minato notices that Kotoha has made her way over to Hiroko. He pauses, brow furrowing. He had noticed the woman wanted to speak to Hiroko several times, though even when he was comatose she had said nothing. Now though, she seemed to have gotten over whatever was holding her back. It seems she finally worked up the courage. Yagura voices quietly. His eyes flicker with something and then he shakes his head. He sighs and glances at Minato again. Come on, you'll want to be there for this. Minato blinks but nods and follows along. He isn't against being there if he is needed. Especially if it concerns one of his kids. As they near, Minato makes out what the woman is saying. I don't want to ruin a festive mood. But I also don't want you to not know. So whenever you are ready to hear it, I am free to talk. Kotoha offers. She fiddles with her hands. It's not a gesture Minato is familiar with seeing from her even in the short time he's known the woman. Kotoha, while not delicate, was still softer than many of the other women Minato was used to. Still, she held herself well enough and Minato could recognize trauma when he saw it. Kotoha had seen things. It only stood to reason that she would be affected by them. Hiroko swallowed and she fidgeted, her eyes flicking their way. I think it would be good to talk. But perhaps at the end of the night. After everyone has had their fill. This isn't just for me after all. It's for all the new Hashira. She says. Kotoha nods and offers a genuine smile. Very well. I think that is a good idea. I'm going to see if Ruka and Kei need help. She says and inclines her head to them, turning and walking away. She joins Yugito as the girl struggles to shape Dango into presentable spheres. Makio and Suma are arguing about things under Kei's supervision while Hinatsuru aids two of Tengen's younger brothers in making the rice. Ruka is overseeing Fu and oddly enough Han in plating what food is there. To the side, Minato can see that the other Jinchuriki are being rallied into setting the tables that have been laid out in the front yard under strings of lights that Naruto and Kyojuro created with seals. Hiroko sighs and her shoulders slump. She casts Minato a gentle look and then straightens. I'm alright too, San. I'm gonna go see if Naruto is up for a game of tag. She says, her eyes shifting with a familiar jesting light. Minato nods. He offers his own smile as he teases her. Just don't destroy the house. Only one Namikaze is allowed to wreck the place. She gives him a sharp look at that, but her laugh carries behind her as she darts off to find her brother. Minato shakes his head and glances back at Yagura. The man has an odd expression on his face. He glances back at Minato, and seeing the unspoken question, hums. Sorry, I was just lost in thought. I never expected anything like this. Following being controlled, I never expected I'd be able to just live like this. And even before then. His eyes flicked from where Kotoha was now giggling in the kitchen to where Inosuke was proudly showing off the fabulous braid he had done to Zenitsu, who gawked at the sight while Tanjiro praised it. Minato understood what the man meant even without him putting it into words. His eyes scanned the groups of kids and adults. His family and friends. Namikaze no, Minato. I am glad we ended up here. Sincerely. Yagura voices after a moment. Minato takes just a moment to fathom the alternative. Perhaps he still had something in Konoha. Perhaps he would have been able to live on with Naruto and continue to lead his village and raise his son. But then he wouldn't have met the Rengokus. He wouldn't have adopted his daughter. Hattori would be dead. Likely many of the others too. In this world, maybe it would have moved on without him, just like his now had to but Minato. He couldn't find it in him to regret coming here and being a part of this. Not when he really thought about it. I am too. Drabble. A demon. Her voice carried an edge of shock. Minato rubbed the back of his neck as he watched Kanae stare at Tamayo. For her part, Tamayo was quiet as she watched the Kocho sisters process. Shinobu shifts, her eyes flicking between Minato and Hattori and back to the demon. She looks apprehensive. Minato knows it's a lot for the girl to take in. He hadn't expected her to be completely fine with it anyway. If you are a demon, then does that mean you can be my friend? Quote. Kanae cuts through Minato's thoughts, moving fast enough that Yoshiro lets out a growl. It earns him a sharp look from Hattori and the two share glares. It doesn't help the girl has dropped to her knees to sit before the demon, her hands now clasping Tamayo's between them. Tamayo stares at Kanae in shock, her eyes widening as her calm countenance changes for just a moment. Don't be so insolent, you can't just, Yoshiro begins, but he's quickly silenced when Tamayo lets out a soft laugh. It's a gentle thing. It's sad though, and part of Minato's heart twists painfully at the reminder of all the pain the woman has gone through. Shinobu sighs behind her sister, but walks over and sits down next to the two. You had some interesting insights into the effects of yang chakra on demon blood, she begins. Minato feels tension drain from his shoulders as the two girls settle in. Hattori smirks as he gently knocks Yoshiro's shoulder. The boy snarls at him, but he doesn't make another move against either girl. Not when Tamayo's smile has yet to fall. That doesn't mean of course that Hattori is free from his wrath. Your presence isn't needed. Go flirt with Utakata. It's a better use of your wasted time. Yoshiro snaps back at the Hashira. Minato can't hold in his laugh even as Hattori shoots the demon another glare. It's telling, however, that he marches off to do exactly that. Minato feels the mutinous glare he receives for his laughter following that is entirely undeserved. Chapter 44. Butterflies dance and fireflies fly. The snow brings way to a new year. And as the flames flicker over the new world, the sun rises. As the pain of the past echoes and is forgotten, memories pave the way to the future. There was something different about learning forms from the other Hashira. Outside of the various styles, Shinobu also noted how each of the Hashira varied their methods and moved through the techniques. Even those who had been taught by another, such as Mikomo or Hiroko, tended to teach very differently from how their former teachers did. Staring at the blade in her grasp, Shinobu was starting to realize that among those various methods, only a handful suited her needs. What with her slim build and her knack for picking processes up faster than physical forms. You are improving. How do you find the fourth form? Mikomo voiced from where she was positioned on the tree in Shinobu's courtyard. The girl had not a hair out of place despite training with Shinobu all morning. The Kocho sister would find it unfair if she wasn't so used to such things. Shinobu flicked her blade again, settling into total concentration with little fanfare. The act of keeping it up had gotten easier the past few weeks as she took any and all training tips she could from the passing Hashira. While Kanae freely wandered and tagged along with other Hashira, Shinobu held their home together and worked with Minato to firmly establish the medical corps for the demon slayers. Or at least improve whatever foundation was already there. She had no time to run around slaying demons while she learned. So she picked up whatever she could from whoever stopped by. So far Tengen and Mikomo had proved to be both the most frequent visitors and the best suited to her learning tastes. It's unsteady. I don't have the force required to follow through with the strikes. Shinobu reflects as she gazes at the blade. Bitterness begins to surface as she grips the handle a tad tighter. She steps forward and takes a deep breath before she steps into the fourth form. It doesn't finish right. The arc of her blade as she spins around on her feet isn't right. The weight is off. Mikomo hums and hops down. Not a speck of dust rises as she lands, her steps near soundless even as her cloak flows behind her. The vivid Haori blurs in the corner of Shinobu's vision. Like a waterfall of flowers. Her throat feels thick at the thought. It reminds her of Kanae. Of her sister's push to create a form that could utilize the aspects of water breathing that she needed while also staying true to her nature. Shinobu didn't have the same luck. While aspects of her sister's forms were in some ways much better suited than those of water breathing, none of them truly met Shinobu's needs. Mikomo brings her blade up. The pretty hue catches Shinobu's eye again as the girl twists into a new form. It's not a water-breathing form this time but rather something Shinobu faintly recalls Hiroko teaching Kaigaku the last time they stopped by. Mikomo eyes the target across the field from them and her feet shift before she flashes and reappears across the grounds. Shinobu swallows thickly as she watches the girl. As swift as lightning. Mikomo looks back at her and smiles gently. Perhaps learning other forms may help. Hiroko taught me the first form of thunder breathing as a way of breaching gaps. I've learned to weave the form with my others, allowing for a more fluid dance. Perhaps you just need to see the other avenues open to you. And that was exactly why Shinobu meshed better with Mikomo than any of the other Hashira. While all the new Hashira were open to learning new forms, they hardly even spoke about why they were interested in adding multiple styles to their repertoire. Well, that and just the way Mikomo went about teaching was much better than say learning from Kyojuro. The last time Shinobu had a session with the Flame Hashira, she found herself pasted to the ground in a fight to keep breathing while the damned blonde stood over her and laughed. The brute apologized, but it didn't stop Shinobu from casting him a glare anytime he was nearby. He met her ferocity with a grace and forgiveness that Shinobu just couldn't understand sometimes. Her eyes flickered back to her blade and she thought about the other forms. What about aerial techniques? She asks. Her mind wanders to the last time she watched Hattori and Minato spar. It had been after the Hashira meeting, the day after actually. Shinobu recalled how Hattori refused to touch the ground the entire time, spending most of his time barreling down on Minato from the skies. That had been 2 weeks ago, and since then Shinobu hadn't the wind Hashira. She'd seen Miss Sechika and Sanemi, however, since the two boys often came to drop off Sanemi's siblings at the Kocho estate so they could learn. Even if Shinobu wanted to ask either for help. Miss Sechika was often too busy and Sanemi was well Shinobu had walked up on him and Kanae flirting enough to step away from that matter. Even when Kanae was gone, Sanemi was often trailing after the Harayu boy for whatever reason. Minato was almost as rare of sight, though Shinobu knew the man wanted her and Kanae for some sort of excursion in a day. Mikomo's gaze softens and she moves back to the center of the field. She proceeds to showcase a few more forms, though these are either too sharp or too grounded for Shinobu's taste. Still, the ninth form of wind breathing was closer to what she wanted. Minato's storm dragon follows, and then the third form of storm breathing. Neither quite fit with what she wants. But they are close. And as Shinobu watches Mikomo, she begins to gain an idea. She shifts on her feet and gazes at the target across the field. Something fluid and airborne, like she's dancing on the wind. But also something that can deal damage. She's not the strongest, but she has always won when it came to tag between her and her sister. So what if? What if she used the poison she was developing? What if instead of beheading demons, she killed them by forcing doses of poison into them over and over? She couldn't do it with a normal blade, but she understood that the swordsmiths of the Demon Slayer Corps were versatile. They had created Himejima's mace. They had created Tengen's unique swords. They could meet her request. And all that was left for her was to create a form that would benefit from their craftsmanship. Her eyes flashed as chakra flickered under her feet. She flew into the air, a weightless feeling falling over her. She worked her chakra exactly as Mikomo had when she dropped from the tree. It slowed her descent, but the speed in her limbs remained. She focused, breathed in. A dozen fluid strokes. Nothing like the harsh swipes or the cleaving motions any of the other slayers used. Instead, they focused on inflicting deep and penetrating wounds in quick succession. When Shinobu landed, she did so soundlessly. She looked over her shoulder. The dummy had holes throughout it, dozens of them clustered around vital areas. It wasn't as neat as she wanted, but it would do for a base. The more spread out her poison was, the easier it would overtake the demon. Mikomo hummed and chuckled. It seems you've decided what to do. Shinobu couldn't stop the smile that crept over her face. Asakusa was just as noisy as she remembered. Fu grimaced at the noise, shifting next to Shinobu and Kanae as she tried to block it out. Her skin felt itchy under the weight of thousands of people nearby. She never liked crowds. "We're almost there. How are you all doing?" Minato called over his shoulder, as though he sensed her discomfort. Then again, outside of Kanae, everyone in their party looked weary of the bright streets. Even Hitori with his practiced smile was tense as he moved alongside them. Minato's blue eyes swept back and caught Fu's gaze for just a moment. She swallowed her unease and huffed. "Fine. Just ready to get away from the crowds," she grumbles. When she had first heard about the other Jinchuriki, she had been interested. She had met all but Yu Takata after all. And upon hearing about Yugito visiting the boy often, she wanted to see for herself. Fu was always curious about the other Jinchuriki. Maybe it was because Fu wondered if she was the only true monster among them. Minato nodded and kept going. His pace quickened just a tad. Not that any of them struggled to keep up. Shinobu had always been fast and she was one of the few who could catch Fu without breaking a sweat. Kanae had been participating in missions with the other Hashira the past few weeks, so she had no trouble either. Hitori was a Hashira. And one of the fastest ones at that. Unless Minato started using Hirishin, Fu was certain the man could keep up with any of them. Even in the air, Fu wasn't sure she could escape him. Not that she wanted to run much. She had chosen this, even if she didn't realize how much she would come to regret it. It's growing late, and yet the city has yet to calm. Fu hates how lively it is. Whenever she was traveling with Akaza, it was never this bad. Thoughts of Akaza further sour her mood. She has yet to hear about the demon, or even see him again. And while part of her understands that he likely chose to stay away because of who she was with, it still didn't stop the echo of hurt in her chest. Akaza had promised to check on her. He promised to visit. She grimaced and looked down. The flickering of scales under her skin calmed her. Chomei always tried to keep her in high spirits. And maybe that was the other reason why Fu had tagged along. While she wasn't as interested as her siblings were in medical pursuits, she was greatly interested in the idea of a good demon. Because she vividly remembered her time with Akaza and how gentle he always was with her. If there was a chance, a way for him to be free. Her thoughts flickered back to the night he left her with the Kocho siblings. She shifts her gaze to the two, catching Shinobu's eyes momentarily. He had only left her because he was afraid of someone else. He had left her and refused to contact her because someone else pulled at his strings. From what Fu had gathered in her time with the demon slayers, demons were complex creatures. They were also beholden to their creator, Kibutsuji Muzan. Which of course meant that the likelihood of Akaza's mystery enemy being Muzan was highly likely. Either that or a demon Muzan created who was stronger than Akaza. Fu felt a surge of annoyance and anger. She could still recall the lost expression on Akaza's face when he tried to recall what he had done to get his tattoos. Maybe Akaza wasn't a good person before he became a demon. But he certainly wasn't the worst. That title belonged to those who killed children. That title belonged to those who tortured and hurt innocents, all because they couldn't look past their own damned prejudice. Fu took a deep breath and avoided the concerned look her sisters sent her way. She focused on Minato's back as they walked. Either way, Fu was curious and she figured this excursion would be good for gathering information. Even if she had to deal with the city. "Here we are," Minato called behind him. He shifted on his feet to look back, casting a soft smile at the gathered ensemble. Then, he opened his arm to gesture at a wall. Fu raised a brow. Had Minato finally lost it? Of course, that was when she noticed that Hattori had stepped up. He turned his head and winked at the rest of them. "Don't be shy. Lady Tamayo doesn't bite. Though Yoshiro might," he jokes before vanishing through the wall. Fu feels like she's gaping, even as her sisters push forward. In the end, Fu is the last one left staring at the wall. Even Minato had entered as he waited for her to gather her shock. She stares at the blank wall and then sighs. She doesn't think she's ever going to get used to this world. She takes a step forward and goes still. Chakra flickers. Her eyes turn and her gaze darts across the shadows. She just swore she. "Fu?" Minato's voice questions. Fu turns back to find his head sticking through the door, concern lacing his tone. She shakes her head and steps through completely. The almost empty feeling inside makes her shiver. She can't feel the outside world at all like this. So she can't even begin to wonder if that flicker had been her imagination. Or if she had truly felt Akaza again. Drabble. He's never felt compelled to do much of anything. Well, perhaps that wasn't the truth. Not when his thoughts always pressed at the seams. Not when his actions carved new wounds through him, even as they healed. Not when the pain he caused never left him. But, he doesn't remember feeling compelled to do something because of his own wants or ambitions. Not like this. Sure, he fights. He seeks out the strong with the hopes of getting stronger himself. But he does that so he can prove himself to him. He doesn't do it for himself. Akaza hasn't ever once fought for himself. But he fights for her. For Fu. A wild child who stole his attention and the abysmal affection he had left. She also gave him back his humanity. Bits and pieces of memories flicker behind his eyes, dancing like fireflies. He can't help the way they churn his gut or the way he wants nothing more than to grab them and drag them closer, so he can gaze into their light just a little longer. But he can't. Not when he is still around. Not when Fu could be in danger. So he watches. He waits. He lies there and prepares to protect the girl who gave him so much more. Even if she will never see him again. Not so long as he can help it. Because he doesn't want to taint her. For all that she calls herself a monster. She couldn't be farther from that truth. Unfortunately, this part is over. I hope you enjoyed it. My apologies for all those quotes. Please have a good morning, afternoon, evening or night. See you next time, faves.